When we talk about same-sex attraction, I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that again, this is a topic dealing with people, not just an issue that we kind of objectively try to, rationally deduce. Here's the answer. Let's give it to you. Now we've fixed the problem. These are people with real struggles, real people with families, oftentimes, and a lot of heartache and a lot of pain from having been very misunderstood. So, again, we don't modify the truth so that we can somehow give a person what it is that they want to hear. Rather, we are called to listen, to understand as much as possible, and try to charitably give that truth in the way that we understand it, but with the reality and a little bit of room for, right, the church to unpack a little bit clearer, even in a person's life, whatever that topic might be. So, for example, we know for a fact that Mary is assumed body and soul into heaven, but there's still room for some dialogue on whether she fell asleep at the end of her life or died. If she died, it can't be connected to original sin. The wages of sin is death, because she is without original sin. That's the Immaculate Conception, conceived without original sin. So there's room for dialogue. What there isn't room for is to say, in that case, Mary's part of the new quadrinity, four persons, one divine being. That's heresy. So I think when we talk about moral truths and the reality of a human person, particular struggles that they might face, we have to be very sensitive to allow for growth to happen where growth can happen, and for charity to be unpacked when we disclose what the church has definitively said. So when we talk about things like same-sex attraction, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit harder. We don't have a declarative, dogmatic statement that this matter has been, same-sex attraction has been fully unpacked. What we do know is that the act of sexual intimacy in same-sex relationships is not considered licit. Just as the act of physical intimacy in a heterosexual couple is not licit if they're not married. Here's the difficulty, and I'll just cut right to the chase. Within a relationship of a heterosexual, the church says ultimately there is a chance for you to enter into a union that is sacramental. That marriage, that union, that sacrament is meant to be unitive and procreative. So there's a whole different ball of trouble and frustration there, because there's a lot of couples who have not lived out that sacrament in a very beautiful and holy way, therefore marring the understanding of the beauty of marriage in its sacrament. So it's easy for a lot of people who, for example, in same-sex relationships have a more, it seems, healthy relationship. They're communicating, they're charitable, they're selfless, they're learning about one another, listening to one another. And then you could see this marriage that's supposedly a sacramental marriage, and they're easily irritated, keeping records of wrongs. They're, fill in the blank with all sorts of ways that they wreck the beauty of that sacrament. The church has not, and will not say that one day the intimacy between a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, will be a sacramental marriage. And the reason she won't say that is because marriage in the Catholic Church is not reduced down to passion, attraction, common interests. In our culture today, marriage is oftentimes reduced down to passion, attraction, common interests. So, for example, it's very probable that if you find someone that you are attracted to and there's passion and you have all these common interests, it just seems like, this is all set up for success. We love each other. Let's just go for it. And there's oftentimes a lot of truth there in that relationship as they get to know one another and learn how to be selfless with one another. But that's not what relationships are reduced down to in terms of the Catholic's understanding of the sacrament of marriage. What the Catholic Church says marriage ultimately is a reflection of God's love in time, right? So God, who is one, three persons, complete gift from one person to the other, and that complete gift of selflessness is fruitful, fecundity, and that is meant to be reflected in marriage. So you have one person loving completely the other loving completely that other, and then potentially there's that third person with the child. It's life-giving. So yes, it's unitive, but it's also procreative. And that's why the church is not going to modify the idea of making same-sex relationships sacramental, because it is missing the procreative component. So as wrecked as the unitive component might be in marriage with a heterosexual couple, there still is the chance for the procreative reality and hopefully healing in the unitive portion. Again, that's some very specific language for a person who's not religiously inclined, who doesn't have an interest in knowing what the church says about relationships. All of this sounds crazy, and I understand that. I actually even can sympathize with that. And it's very difficult for us to superimpose a religious construct upon a person who doesn't believe that way, doesn't see life that way, was never even exposed to that pattern of, religious ideology and philosophy. So in some ways, that video, The Third Way, is kind of an articulation of someone who has a Christian language, is interested in falling in step with the Catholic Church's ideas, and so it can work. It can work in terms of real people sharing their same-sex attraction, their story, and how they came to grips with living that out within the Catholic context. And as Father Mike said, and some of the others have said, the Catholic Church has her arms wide open for anyone who has any type of same-sex attraction, because we're a place that loves. And even if you struggle in terms of that physical intimacy, we still love you as a church. And just like we still love a heterosexual couple who's not married yet, who is struggling with physical intimacy, there's still that love there, right? But the teaching is still going to be the teaching, which is there's a better way to show your love for a heterosexual couple than just sleeping together, living together before the sacrament of marriage, because it robs that sacrament of what it's intended to look like, be like, and embody. Just like the church won't change her opinion of the difficulty within a same-sex union of a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, who has that unitive connection but can't bring about the procreative possibility. Now, look, I understand there's a million different variables here that we could talk about. There are many heterosexual couples who can have children, and they find that out, they're married. Is their marriage now robbed of that sacramental authenticity? And the answer is, of course, no, because they didn't realize that there was infertility and the inability to have children. And so not every time a couple has intimacy is there going to be a child. So it's just that openness to life that the church is asking for, because it's reflecting in time that life-giving love of the Trinity. Now, I want to simply kind of wrap this first part up with this saying. I realize that for me as a man, I'm a heterosexual man who met my wife in high school when I was in high school, and we have 9 children. So in some ways, what do I know about the same-sex lifestyle? I don't know anything really when it comes to that practical daily experience and the struggle and the agony, but I've wanted to understand from people themselves who are in that lifestyle why they're frustrated and what their thoughts are. And so part of this course is to be open to those thoughts, those voices, and so it's okay to wrestle with some of these topics and issues. And so be careful not to be so adamant that you're not listening anymore. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more.